Hey everyone, welcome to another tutorial for Theophos Supreme Lighting System. In these next few videos, I want to start going through the different behaviors and going setting by setting and just seeing how things work, seeing the different combinations, the different customization that you can have. So I have this scene set up. This is using an old iteration of a game that I'm working on called The Water Calls. A little bit of shameless self-promotion. You can go wishlist that on Steam right now. So this is a little scene setup. I got this background light over here just for ambience. We're going to be working with this light up here. If I hit play and I walk into this zone over here, we can see that we're going to start the startup sequence. It's going to go through 3 phases. If you played the demo of Theophos, or you watch the first video on this channel where we go through the demo stage, then you kind of recognize this setup where the startup sequence is using 3 different phases, where we have the initial strike of the light, we have the stabilization period where we're going to rest at a low intensity, and then we have the ramp up phase where we're going to start to fade into the full intensity, which in this specific light is 100 lumens. And this is all customizable, and we will go through each of the different settings, look at the different combinations, some of the problems that you might have, because as I noted in the tooltip for startup fade duration of the startup sequence, initial warm-up in seconds, and so that's the initial warm-up from completely off to the maximum startup intensity, which is 5 lumens. And then it should be greater than startup flicker duration, because if startup flicker duration is higher than the fade-in duration, you might start to end up with a little bit of behavioral problems. And I don't think it breaks anything, but you just end up with, you can end up with some weird behavior situations. Like right there, you can see that the flickering starts to overlap. It looks like we didn't get to the point where we're fading up to the full intensity because the light got stuck. So just little things like that, where you want to play with different combinations, because the way the math is all working on here, some things are transitioning, some things are overlapping just to keep everything smooth. And so if you have certain phases that are longer or certain behavior that is longer, you can end up with some weird stuff. So max startup intensity, if we set this to 10 and then we set, that's the brightness. We can set the brightness. Let's set that to 25 just to exaggerate so you guys can see what's going on. We'll set the startup fade duration to something like 10, so it's going to take a little bit longer to get to this 25. The startup flicker duration is going to be, we'll keep that at, what's the default? 1.5. Let's keep that at 5 just because we boosted these numbers up. The flicker count we'll keep at default. The interval we'll keep at default. The stabilization duration we will keep at 10. So not really that visible because we set the initial brightness to 25. We can see the flicker duration is over, and this is the warm-up or the ramp-up. If we set the max startup intensity back to 5 or even something lower, if we wanted to go 1, we'll be able to see what's happening a little better. So we got this low intensity phase. The flickering is going to go for a little bit, then it's going to stop. We're going to rest at the stabilization, and then we're going to begin to do the ramp up. So the startup flicker count is going to be 4, and that's kind of like the initial burst of flickers. If we were to raise this to something like 16 and then go through this, we're going to see we get a lot more flickering. And then we're gonna get into the holding phase again, where the flickering is gonna stop, and then it'll ramp up. If we wanted to set the flicker duration to be equal to the stabilized duration, I believe the flickering will continue into that stabilization phase. It's not gonna stop and hold. Yeah. So it's going to continue going through the stabilization phase, and then it'll start to ramp up. So startup flicker, let me change this down to 8. Startup flicker interval minimum and startup flicker interval maximum is a random range for the interval between the flickering. So right now, with the 0.05 and then the 0.15, it means it's going to have a minimum interval of 0.05 and a maximum of 0.15. And for each flicker, it's going to choose a random range between that. So right now with this range, you can see the flickering's pretty quick. If I was to change this to something like 0.25, and let's exaggerate and go to like 1 second, we'll see that the flickering is going to be a lot more slow. So if I was to change this to something like 0.75, we're going to close that range, but we're still going to be big enough where it's going to still take longer. If we change both of these to the same number, and there you go. You can see just playing around with the numbers, you get different results. Let's set that back to default. In fact, we'll set everything back to default. The startup idle sound plateau volume, which is a mouthful, is going to be the sound that the volume that the sound rests at when it's going through the stabilized duration. I didn't add any sound to this light because I wanted to avoid annoying you guys every time I turn the light on, but we can go ahead and do that real quick. And that might be a volume thing. Buzzify. We'll use that one. Trying to pick something that doesn't destroy your eardrums every time I hit play. So if we were to hit play, and then I come over here, hopefully you guys can hear that. So if we come back to the startup sequence section, this startup idle sound plateau volume is that initial sound we're starting at. So we're going to hold at 0.1 for volume, and then we are going to, let's go to our sound category. When we begin to go through that ramp up phase, we're going to ramp up to this volume right here, the max idle volume, which is 0.075. I'm not going to turn that any louder so I don't blow anybody's ears out. Might even turn it lower. Because if I turn this up to, let's say, 0.3, you'll hear that the initial sound is louder, and then it's going to ramp up with the light intensity. Our next setting is the startup color, and as you guys have already noticed, a little bit of greenish tint, and then as we warm up, we're going to go into the default light color, which in this case is white. A little bit hard to see with the white walls here, or not the white wall, sorry, the wallpaper. But if I change this to something like blue, and then we go ahead and play, we're going to get blue instead of green, and then we will still transition into that default white color, which we can also come over here to the color, change that to, let's change that to green, and then go ahead and start that up. And then we'll go from blue to green. And then as we saw, the stabilized duration is just how long we're gonna hang in that holding pattern between the initial strike and the ramp up. But I think that's actually it for this video. We've gone through everything for the startup sequence. Again, if you don't want the startup sequence, if you turn that off, it's gonna default to the warm-up duration, which is set to 10 seconds. So we're gonna skip all that flickering stuff and we're just gonna get straight into a fade in. And then if you don't want any fade in, you want instant on, you can set that to 0.1. I think if we go to 0, it's gonna default itself to 0.1. That's the minimum you can go to. But if we walk in now, we're just gonna get it instant on, straight to full brightness. And that might be something for a more modern fluorescent light. That's going to do it for this video. If you have any questions, if there's something that I didn't cover as much as you would have liked me to, go ahead and leave a comment below, and I will get back to you. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.